William Henry Harrison was born on February 9, 1773, into the family of Virginia planter Benjamin Harrison V. He was the seventh child and the third son. The Harrisons were a respected family in the New World. The family's founder, Benjamin Harrison, had arrived in Jamestown in 1633 and became a member of its governing council. Benjamin became a traditional family name among the Harrisons. As in fairy tales, the youngest son, William, received the least from his parents. The eldest, Benjamin, inherited the estate. The second son was given a legal education, while William was expected to become a physician. Until the age of 14, the boy studied at home, after which he was sent to Hampden-Sydney College. The future president's older brothers studied at the more prestigious College of William and Mary.
At college, William read ancient history and Roman classics. Later, in his public speeches, General Harrison often referred to the commanders of ancient Rome. Afterwards, the young man was sent to study in Richmond. There, the planter's son joined the abolitionist group known as the Humane Society. Later, as a presidential candidate, William Harrison would tell voters in the North about this experience. To Southerners, however, he would not mention it. In 1791, William was sent to continue his studies in Philadelphia. But shortly after his arrival, news came that his father, Benjamin V, had died. His elder brothers refused to pay for William's further education. The young Harrison tried to enter government service, but the governor of Virginia suggested that he first serve in the army. In his autobiography, the president wrote that within just a day he became an ensign in the 1st Infantry Regiment. In reality, a little more time had passed. The Virginian gentleman began his military service as a recruiter. He managed to enlist 80 volunteers and bring them to Pittsburgh. Then he served at the Western Fort, Washington. At that time, soldiers from Sinclair's detachment, which had been defeated by the Indians, arrived at the fort and wrecked the beer shops. The young officer recalled that many of his comrades drank and, according to him, died from the consequences of drunkenness. Harrison hated drunkards, so when the new commander of the fort ordered that soldiers found drinking be whipped, William readily carried out the order. A year later, Harrison was sent to Philadelphia. There, the young officer met Anthony Wayne, who was forming the Legion of the United States. William joined his detachment as a lieutenant and later rose to become Wayne's aide-de-camp. In 1794, the Legion of the United States arrived at Fort Washington. There, Wayne and his men won a victory in the Battle of Fallen Timbers over the Native Americans led by Chief Blue Jacket. Harrison displayed remarkable bravery. According to eyewitnesses, he remained under fire the entire time. In 1795, the whites and the Native Americans signed a peace treaty by which Ohio came under U.S. control. The treaty bore the signatures of U.S. officers, including Harrison, as well as native chiefs. Harrison continued to serve on the frontier. There, he met Anna Tuthill Symmes, the daughter of Colonel Tuthill. Harrison wished to marry her, but her father at first refused to give his daughter to a soldier. The couple received support from Anthony Wayne. According to one account, they arranged an elopement and were married at a friend's house of William's. Another version says the wedding took place at the Symmes' home, but the bride's father walked out in the middle of the ceremony. Soon afterward, however, the colonel accepted his son-in-law, especially since William did not intend to remain in the army. The captain tried to make his fortune.
He invested in several ventures, but they all failed. In 1796, his wife Anna gave birth to their first child. William sought new ways to earn money and darkly joked that his children were growing faster than his cash box, especially after the couple decided to adopt two children of their friends. In 1798, he resigned as fort commander and left the army. After trying several occupations, the former captain was appointed Secretary of the Northwest Territory, earning a salary of $1,200 a year. Just a year later, the young politician was elected to Congress, where he succeeded in passing a law that allowed settlers to purchase small plots of farmland and frontier land on credit. In 1800, the Indiana Territory was established, and as a knowledgeable expert on the region, he became its governor. The territorial government consisted of him and 3 judges. They were permitted to apply the laws of other states, but could not create new ones. For his family, the governor built a 2-story brick mansion, which he named Grouseland after the abundance of grouse that roamed the surrounding area.
Harrison launched an active program of initiatives. He succeeded in establishing a library and a newspaper in Vincennes, but his main focus was on increasing the white population in Indiana. In his view, this land should not remain in its natural state, inhabited by a few miserable savages. He negotiated land sales with native tribes, always acting in the interests of white settlers, though he was aware of the difficult situation of the Native Americans and the injustices they suffered at the hands of whites, about which he wrote to the president. Harrison was also appalled by the practice of supplying alcohol to Native Americans. He prohibited traders from giving liquor to hunting parties in order to buy their game cheaply afterward. He tried to pass a law through the territorial legislature banning the sale of alcohol to Native Americans and almost secured support, provided that similar measures were adopted in neighboring states and territories. However, this did not happen because in practice, strict enforcement of such a ban was extremely difficult. Goods, including alcohol, traveled long distances, often through remote and hard-to-reach areas, making compliance almost impossible to monitor. The future president purchased slaves, but he did so under contracts that granted freedom to the enslaved persons at the end of the term. For example, Jack Butler worked for him for 12 years before continuing on a farm that had belonged to his former master. Harrison also attempted to secure legislation allowing slaves purchased in the South to be kept in Indiana, which would have attracted planter settlers, but Congress prohibited it. Subsequently, the governor enacted a series of laws that reinforced the unequal status of African American people. African Americans were forbidden from testifying against whites in court or hiring white workers. The law defined a person as black if even one grandparent was non-white. This was part of a broader strategy of garrison and colonial administration to consolidate the social and legal dominance of white settlers.
That is, Harrison simultaneously sought to increase the white population, to attract Southern planters, wealthy landowners from the slaveholding states whose economies were built on enslaved labor, and at the same time to formally comply with the restrictions of the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which prohibited slavery in Indiana. It was at his initiative that in 1805, the territorial legislature passed a new act allowing slaves to be brought in and registered as hired servants.
Contracts could be concluded for terms of up to 99 years, while the children of such people obtained freedom only upon reaching the age of 28 to 35, an age that was still quite late. Harrison and his supporters expected that this scheme would draw Southern planters into Indiana, thereby increasing the white population and strengthening the region's economy.
Of course, William Harrison also had a favorite adversary. In Shakespeare's tragedy Coriolanus, the main character, Marsyas, speaks of his enemy, Aufidius. "He is a lion. I am proud to hunt him." A phrase that conveys not only enmity, but also respect for the strength of one's rival. Harrison regarded his own Aufidius in the same way, the Shawnee leader Tecumseh, whom he believed could have founded an entire empire if he had lived in another era. Tecumseh led native resistance, attempting to unite the tribes in opposition to white settlers. He was assisted by his brother, the prophet Tenskwatawa, who urged the Native Americans to reject chiefs who sold land to whites. Harrison's goal was not to confront the brothers directly, but to undermine their influence in the eyes of their people. He understood that the power of Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa lay not only in their personal charisma, but also in the trust of the native communities. To this end, the governor devised a clever strategy. He persuaded the Native Americans to demand that the prophet Tenskwatawa demonstrate his supernatural power. The proposed miracle was something impossible. For example, to make the sun disappear from the sky. At first glance, this seemed like a brilliant move. If the prophet failed to fulfill the demand, his authority would collapse and Tecumseh's position would weaken along with it. However, Harrison's plan backfired. In 1806, a solar eclipse was indeed approaching, and when it occurred, it not only failed to discredit Tenskwatawa, but actually strengthened the Native Americans' belief in his prophetic gift. Some historians suggest that the Shawnee may have been warned about the upcoming celestial event in advance by the British, who possessed astronomical knowledge and were interested in supporting native resistance.
In 1808, Tecumseh and Tenskwatawa founded Prophetstown in Indiana, also known as the Town of the Prophet. It became the center of the Pan-Indian movement. Delegations of Shawnee, Delaware, Miami, Winnebago, Kickapoo, and other tribes gathered there. The settlement quickly grew to several thousand inhabitants, resembling a large Native American village with longhouses, skin tents, and wooden structures. Alcohol was strictly forbidden, regarded as a cause of native decline, and the prophet demanded that his followers live in peace with the Americans, though raids by warriors still occurred. In 1810, the governor and the Shawnee leader met in Vincennes for negotiations. Around 400 armed warriors attended, which in itself looked like a show of force. Tecumseh spoke out against the purchase of native lands, insisting that they belonged to the entire Indian people rather than to individual tribes. Harrison replied that, if that were true, God would not have divided them into different languages. Their first meeting brought no results. In the spring of 1811, Tecumseh once again came to the capital of the Indiana Territory, but again no agreement was reached. He sought to create a national Indian confederacy, stretching from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. For this purpose, immediately after the talks, he set out on a great diplomatic tour. Yet his call for unity met with obstacles. Native tribes had lived separately for centuries, each with its own language, customs, and land. Some had rivalries dating back before the arrival of the Americans, and the memory of recent bloody conflicts made old grudges hard to forget. Their experiences with settlers also differed. Some had grown accustomed to trade, receiving iron tools, firearms, and cloth, and did not wish to risk losing these benefits. For others, Americans were nothing but usurpers, seizing hunting grounds and destroying their future. Thus, within the same alliance, some chiefs leaned toward peace while others pressed for war. Harrison and American diplomats skillfully exploited these divisions. It was enough to persuade a few compliant tribes to sell land, and the deal was declared binding. This fractured the natives even further. For some, concessions seemed a chance to preserve peace. For others, they were acts of betrayal. Another major obstacle was Tecumseh's brother, the prophet. His teachings inspired many, but some tribes found them too harsh. The ban on alcohol was not universally embraced, and the rejection of European goods was seen by some as a step backward. Yet Tecumseh's efforts were not in vain. He succeeded in forming a strong core of supporters: Shawnee, Kickapoo, Winnebago, and part of the Delawares. His words were heard both in the North and the South, and his message that the land belonged to all Indians resonated deeply with young warriors eager to defend their future. But achieving full agreement among dozens of independent tribes proved impossible. A confederacy arose, but it was too fragile to withstand the first serious blow.
By this time, tensions between the settlers and the Native Americans had reached a breaking point. The alliance of tribes formed by Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwatawa was seen by American authorities as a serious threat, while the Native Americans refused to recognize land sale treaties and increasingly strengthened their military influence. Harrison feared that any delay would give the Prophetstown settlement new strength and allies. Therefore, he decided to act first. In the fall of 1811, while Tecumseh was on a tour, the governor of Indiana led a detachment of soldiers, militia, and volunteers, including a group of Native Americans, to Prophetstown. At the edge of the town, they were met by a messenger from Tenskwatawa, the Shawnee prophet, carrying a white flag and proposing negotiations which were scheduled to take place the following morning. Harrison's forces halted on a rise and posted guards, but no serious fortifications had been built. During the night, taking advantage of the element of surprise and the weak defenses of the camp, the Native Americans launched an attack. The militia fired back, but in the firelight, their positions were clearly visible, making them an easy target from a tactical point of view. At one point, the situation became so critical that Harrison himself could have been killed, but he survived, largely by chance. The future president could not find his white horse and had to ride around the camp on another horse. This may have saved his life, as another white horse's rider, Colonel Owen, was shot. With the coming of dawn, the fighting gradually subsided. The Native Americans, deprived of the advantage of surprise, began to withdraw, allowing the militia to regroup. Exhausted but encouraged by the failure of the attack, Harrison's soldiers first repelled the attackers and then moved on to Prophetstown. The town's inhabitants, realizing they could not hold the settlement, abandoned it, leaving no resistance inside. Harrison's men occupied the town, looted houses and food stores, and then set fire to the buildings. The flames spread quickly, and by the end of the day, Prophetstown was reduced to ruins.
Those who returned were greeted as heroes, and for some, the battle became a springboard to a political career. Yet, Harrison's actions raised questions. He was often criticized for leaving the camp unfortified, and as a result, for the heavy losses suffered in the night battle. In addition, none of the native leaders were captured, and the enemy war parties scattered across the frontier. Moreover, the Shawnee entered into an alliance with the British, who supplied native tribes with weapons, ammunition, and advisors. For London, this was a way to contain American expansion westward. The United States suspected, largely with good reason, that it was the British who were encouraging the natives to fight. In the American press and in political speeches, it was repeatedly declared that behind the Shawnees stands the British Lion. A year later, the United States entered into war with Britain, and Harrison returned to the army. The Battle of Tippecanoe was already being perceived as a victory and as a prologue symbolizing the beginning of the struggle against the misty Albion. With the outbreak of the war, the main theater of operations shifted to the northwestern frontier. Harrison arrived in Kentucky and secured his appointment as commander of the militia. Meanwhile, the British, under Major General Isaac Brock and together with Tecumseh, compelled the garrison of Fort Detroit, America's most important stronghold in the region, to surrender. Native warriors surrounded the fort, creating the impression of a vast army, while the British positioned their artillery to advantage. Panic spread within the besieged fort. Civilians and soldiers alike feared the worst if the place were stormed. Under these pressures, the American commander, General William Hull, capitulated in August 2012, handing over to the enemy the most vital stronghold on the Great Lakes.
In September 1812, Harrison was promoted to the rank of general and took command of the Kentucky forces. In the winter, he began a military campaign toward the northwest, advancing through the territory of the Miami tribe to deprive the enemy of resources and strengthen the positions of the United States. The army suffered from cold, hunger, and disease. Many soldiers were unable to continue the march. The vanguard, commanded by General Winchester, was the first to reach a strategically important point at the Raisin River and attempted to hold their position. However, the British, supported by Native Americans, surrounded them and forced a surrender. Understanding that Harrison's main army was already approaching and outnumbered them, the British chose to withdraw to avoid a fight with superior forces, leaving about 80 American prisoners in the care of the Native Americans. A massacre began, which was only stopped by the arrival of Tecumseh. This episode left a deep mark on the American memory, giving rise to the battle cry, "Remember the Raisin." Later, Harrison repelled a British attack on Fort Meigs and liberated Detroit. He pursued the retreating British forces and their native allies along the Thames River. Under his command were about 3,500 soldiers facing fewer than 1,500 British and native combatants. The British surrendered almost immediately, while the Shawnee continued to fight, giving time for their families to escape. When Tecumseh was killed, the remaining native forces laid down their arms. Historians still do not know whose blow ended the life of the Shawnee leader. The flanking maneuver against the native forces was led by cavalryman Richard Johnson, and during this encounter, he engaged in hand-to-hand combat with a native warrior, possibly Tecumseh himself. Johnson never claimed to have killed the chief, but the legend became widely accepted in popular memory. Following these victories, Harrison became a national hero. In New York City Hall, a painting was hung depicting him receiving the surrender of the native leaders. The general traveled to various cities, showcasing his fame, but soon under pressure from Secretary of War Armstrong, he resigned despite his popularity among the public.
In 1814, 41-year-old William Harrison returned to his native Ohio, leaving behind military campaigns and years of service. He tried his hand at business, hoping for new success, but fortune once again turned away. His efforts bore no fruit. Disappointed but not broken, Harrison turned to politics. His experience, discipline, and determination were recognized. He was elected to the House of Representatives. There, he zealously advocated for compensation to the families of fallen militia, even proposing the introduction of universal military service. In his speeches, he drew examples from ancient Athens, Sparta, and Rome, seeking to breed the spirit of classical valor into contemporary politics. Yet his colleagues remained indifferent. His ideals seemed too strict and foreign to them. Harrison's political career progressed slowly but steadily. He rose from the Ohio Senate to the U.S. Senate,
and later received a prestigious and well-paid post as ambassador to Colombia. It was a chance to improve his financial situation. The former general was burdened by debts, and money was as necessary to him as recognition. But fate played another cruel trick. In the House of Representatives, he sharply condemned General Andrew Jackson's execution of a man in Florida. Jackson did not forget this criticism, and when he became president in March 1829, just 4 days after his inauguration, Harrison was dismissed from office. The former diplomat's financial situation worsened sharply. To his misfortunes was added a personal tragedy. His eldest son, John Cleves, passed away, leaving behind 6 children and an overwhelming burden of debts totaling $12,000. Only thanks to the intervention of an old friend, Richard Johnson, was John Cleves' widow allowed to repay the debt gradually, over 18 years, without interest, saving the family from complete ruin. It was not until 1836 that Harrison managed to somewhat restore his position. He obtained a modest but stable post as a clerk in the district courts. Nevertheless, the modest salary allowed him to retain his property and preserve the family estate, avoiding its sale. Life slowly returned to its normal course, and the former general regained a sense of stability, though not in glory or wealth, but in quiet, everyday security.
But fate once again smiled upon Harrison. During the stern presidency of Andrew Jackson, a new political landscape took shape in the nation. 2 parties, like rival camps, struggled for power and influence. The Democrats ruled with a firm hand, while rising to meet them were the Whigs, a party still searching for its voice and identity. At that moment, the people's memory turned once more to the old general. His name recalled military victories, and his figure evoked the bygone valor of the frontier. For the Whigs, he was a ready-made symbol, a banner to be raised in their struggle against the Democrats. Yet attitudes toward him were far from unanimous. One influential Whig called Harrison a candidate of the past, not the future, hinting at his advanced age and detachment from contemporary issues. Moreover, some of his allies even suggested that during the campaign he should avoid speaking about his political principles, beliefs, or plans for the presidency. What they wanted was not a politician with a program, but an image, a gray-haired veteran whose very name stirred the imagination of the people. In 1836, Harrison found himself in an unusual position. The Whig Party nominated not 1, but 4 candidates. Their strategy was cunning. To prevent the Democrats from winning a majority in the Electoral College and thereby force the House of Representatives to decide the presidency. Harrison was but one figure in this partisan chess game. Meanwhile, the Democrats placed their hopes on Richard Johnson, a hero whose name was surrounded by controversy. Across the nation, a legend thundered that it was he who struck down Tecumseh at the Battle of the Thames. This tale was eagerly exploited. Fairs and theaters hosted a touring play titled Tecumseh, or the Battle of the Thames, in which Johnson appeared as an almost epic hero. Newspapers fanned the excitement. Some even accused Harrison of deliberately omitting Johnson's feat in his official report on the battle. Despite these attacks, the general achieved the best results among all the Whig candidates, winning in 7 states. But the overall victory still belonged to the Democrats.
3 years later, in 1839, the party was once again searching for its hero. The contest stood between the seasoned orator Henry Clay and 2 military men, Harrison and Winfield Scott. It was then that a young Whig, still little known to the public, Abraham Lincoln, took the stage and delivered a fiery speech in support of Harrison. That speech became a harbinger of future triumph. In December, after tense rounds of voting, the party convention finally nominated the old general. The party's decision was a turning point. The Whigs now had a single candidate, William Henry Harrison. His election campaign quickly turned into a true popular spectacle. The strategy focused not on serious political debates, but on crafting the image of a man of the people. Propagandists presented Harrison as a simple veteran, living in a log cabin and drinking hard cider, the beverage of farmers and working men. The contrast was obvious. The humble old tip set against the arrogant Democrats, tied to the elite. The slogan, "Tip a canoe and Tyler too," echoed across the country, while bands and street parades created a festive atmosphere. The tactic worked. In 1840, America witnessed for the first time a campaign in the modern style, with mass rallies, songs, slogans, and vivid imagery. The people embraced Harrison with enthusiasm, and he won a decisive victory, becoming the 9th President of the United States. But the triumph was short-lived. On a cold March day in 1841, the newly elected president delivered the longest inaugural address in the nation's history, nearly 2 hours in the icy wind without a hat or coat. He then attended 3 inaugural balls, disregarding the onset of a chill. Soon it developed into pneumonia, and within a month he was dead, having barely begun his duties. His death shocked the nation and marked the first time a president died in office, transferring supreme power to the vice president. Harrison set the record for the shortest tenure in the history of the American presidency.